Subscribe now, it's completely free and it won't cost you a thing. The chamber hummed with an unnatural stillness, the kind that came before something irreversible. At the center stood High Lord Zarathian, his biomechanical armor gleaming under the cold, artificial light of the Galactic Dominion's War Council chamber. His elongated fingers drummed against the metal armrest of his throne, impatience flickering in his glowing amethyst eyes. Before him, shackled and bruised, was the human, the Deathworlder. Captain Elias Carter stood tall despite the bruises on his face, his torn uniform still bearing the insignia of Earth's elite strike force. He didn't kneel. He didn't beg. He simply stared at Zarathian with an expression that was more annoyance than fear. The terms are simple, Zarathian finally spoke, his voice layered with electronic undertones. You surrender Earth's colonies. You submit to Dominion rule. You acknowledge our superiority. And in return, your people will live as subjects rather than obstacles. Silence. Zarathian's fingers stopped drumming. I am being generous, he added as if that would make a difference. Humans, despite your barbaric origins, have proven useful. But resistance is futile. Still silence. The alien's patience thinned. Do you understand what is at stake? He asked, leaning forward. You are alone, Carter. The human fleet has been decimated. Earth's defenses are failing. The Dominion does not ask twice. Elias exhaled slowly. His jaw clenched but not from fear. He was holding back something. Laughter. When it finally broke free, it was sharp, sudden, and completely out of place. The chamber's high-ranking officials stiffened at the sound. Zarathian's eyes flared in confusion and insult. Is something amusing, Deathworlder? He hissed. Elias grinned, his teeth stained with blood, his bruised eye nearly swollen shut, yet his spirit unbroken. Yeah, he said, his voice hoarse yet steady. The way you think this was ever going to work? Zarathian's expression darkened. You are in no position to. I'm in the perfect position, Elias interrupted. Because you still don't get it, do you? You don't understand what it means to come from a death world. Zarathian leaned back slightly, intrigued but still visibly irate. Elias continued, voice unwavering. You look at us and see savages, he said. Uncivilized brutes who stumbled into the stars with nothing but arrogance and primitive weaponry. You think our aggression is a weakness. But you're wrong. He took a slow step forward despite the weight of the shackles. Guards flinched, hands tightening around plasma rifles. Our world tried to kill us from the moment we were born, Elias said. We weren't given the luxury of an easy existence. We fought against predators that made your war beasts look like house pets. We conquered diseases that wiped out entire populations. We turned the very elements into weapons when nature itself tried to break us. Zarathian's expression remained unreadable, but the silence in the room was telling. And you? Elias scoffed. You come from a civilization that has known nothing but power and control. Your empire was built on submission, not struggle. You don't know what it means to fight for every scrap of ground, every breath of air. But we do. He lifted his head, eyes burning with something primal. And that's why we don't surrender. The room was dead silent. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Then Zarathian stood, towering over Elias. The High Lord's voice, when it came, was softer, but laced with something venomous. Fascinating, he said. But words do not change reality. Your people are broken. Your fleet is shattered. And you, Carter, are... A loud beep cut him off. One of the Dominion officers scrambled toward a blinking panel. His pale skin lost what little color it had as he read the incoming report. His throat bobbed as he turned back toward Zarathian. My lord, the officer stammered, we have a problem. Zarathian's jaw tightened. What kind of problem? The officer hesitated. The human fleet, he swallowed hard. It's not destroyed. Zarathian's head snapped toward Elias, who was still smiling. Oh, grinning. You didn't actually think we'd come alone, did you? Elias said. Zarathian's glowing eyes narrowed. You lie. Elias shrugged. Check your long-range scanners. Zarathian didn't need to. The sirens that suddenly blared through the war chamber confirmed everything. Impossible, one of the council members whispered. They should be dead? Elias finished for him. Yeah, you thought wrong. The screens surrounding the chamber flickered to life. Hundreds of human warships were emerging from the darkness, their hulls gleaming under the distant light of a nearby star. Engines roared to life, and weapons systems locked onto Dominion vessels. Zarathian's hands clenched into fists. This changes nothing, he roared. We still outnumber you 10-1. Elias exhaled, tilting his head. See, that's the funny thing about humans, he said. You think we fight because we have the numbers. Because we think we can win. He grinned wider. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because you told us we couldn't. The first human torpedoes struck the Dominion flagship with the force of a dying sun. Zarathian's throne room erupted into chaos. And the Deathworlder smiled. Zarathian's war chamber was no longer a place of cold, calculated intimidation. It had become a battlefield of its own. Sirens wailed, emergency lights pulsed crimson, and Dominion officers scrambled to their stations, their sleek, uniformed movements suddenly disjointed with panic. Elias Carter stood amidst the chaos, his shackles still locked around his wrists, but his grin never fading. He saw it in their eyes, the realization, the fear. The Dominion, for all its might, had underestimated humans. Again. Zarathian turned to the nearest officer. Scramble the fleet. Deploy planetary defenses. Wipe them from the sky. The High Lord's voice, usually a measured, composed thing, now carried a raw edge of fury. The officer hesitated. My lord, our long-range scanners, they detect more human vessels than anticipated. They are using gravitational distortions to disrupt our targeting systems. Our fleets are struggling to adapt. Then adapt faster. Zarathian roared, his fist slamming against the throne's armrest, sending a wave of static energy rippling through the room. Elias chuckled. Oh buddy, you really should have seen this coming. Zarathian's glowing eyes snapped back to him. You mock your own demise, Deathworlder? Elias took a deliberate step forward, the clinking of his shackles drowned by the sirens. You don't get it, do you? You never did. Humans don't just fight wars. We survive them. We endure. We break, we bleed, and then, he leaned in slightly, voice almost conspiratorial, we come back angrier. Zarathian's features twisted in something resembling disgust. Your arrogance is exhausting. Oh, I promise you, Elias bared his teeth. I'm just getting started. A sudden explosion rocked the chamber. The display screens that loomed above flickered wildly, then shifted to show the carnage outside. The Dominion fleet, vast, overwhelming, seemingly indomitable, was being torn apart. Human warships moved with terrifying precision, their smaller vessels darting between the massive Dominion dreadnoughts, surgically disabling their weapons and engines before launching devastating final blows. A strategy built on weakness turned into an overwhelming strength. Zarathian watched in stunned silence as his mighty fleet fractured under the relentless human assault. Impossible, he muttered. This is not possible. Elias smirked. Oh, it's happening. The Dominion leader's hands tightened into claws. Then I will crush your hope personally. With a wave of his arm, the shackles binding Elias unlocked and clattered to the floor. A second later, two massive Dominion enforcers rushed forward, towering over Elias like mountains of muscle and biosteel. Elias rolled his shoulders. Finally. I was getting bored. The first enforcer lunged, a strike meant to incapacitate, to break him in one calculated motion. Elias twisted, letting the blow glance off his shoulder before driving his elbow into the enforcer's throat. The alien staggered back, choking as Elias grabbed its own stun baton and drove it into the creature's ribs. A sickening crack echoed through the chamber. The second enforcer was faster, swinging a massive arm toward him. Elias ducked, barely avoiding a strike that would have shattered bone. He pivoted, using the momentum of his dodge to sweep the alien's legs out from under it, sending the enforcer crashing to the ground. Zarathian's rage was palpable. Enough. Kill him. The fallen enforcer reached for a sidearm, but Elias was faster. He grabbed the weapon and fired. The energy pulse sent the enforcer sprawling, unconscious. Elias turned, weapon now aimed directly at Zarathian. You were saying? The High Lord did not move. Not out of fear. No, Zarathian was too proud for that, but out of calculation. His mind worked furiously, analyzing every possibility, every path that led to victory. And yet, none remained. Your people will still die, he snarled. Even if your fleet takes this battle, the Dominion will not stop hunting you. You cannot escape the reach of an empire that spans the stars. Elias tilted his head. See, that's where you're wrong. Because you think we came here to escape. Zarathian hesitated. What? Elias took a slow step forward, eyes locked onto the alien warlord. We didn't come here to run. We came here to end this. The chamber's main comms suddenly crackled to life. Captain Carter, this is Admiral Vasquez. The Dominion flagship's defenses are compromised. Orders? Elias kept his weapon trained on Zarathian. You know what to do, Admiral. Understood. Beginning orbital strike. The ship trembled beneath their feet. Outside, the human fleet shifted, aligning their weapons toward the Dominion's Central War Command. The flagship, the very heart of the Dominion's military, was about to fall. Zarathian's breath quickened, realization dawning in his furious eyes. No. You wouldn't dare. Elias lowered his weapon slightly, smiling with grim satisfaction. Humans don't surrender. The first orbital bombardment hit with the force of a god's hammer, and the High Lord of the Dominion finally understood what it meant to fear a Deathworlder. As the chamber structure trembled, sparks raining from the overhead fixtures, Elias advanced on Zarathian. The High Lord tried to remain composed, but the shadows of doubt flickered in his glowing eyes. This is not over, Zarathian hissed. The Dominion does not fall to savages. Elias sighed. See, that's your problem. You keep calling us savages, but all we ever do is adapt. He holstered the stolen sidearm. You were arrogant enough to think we wouldn't? The ship rocked violently as another round of bombardment struck. Alarms blared across the war chamber. Dominion officers ran for emergency exits, abandoning their once mighty leader. The structure groaned under the assault, plating peeling from the walls as the destruction closed in. Zarathian still stood, though his throne room crumbled around him. If I fall, another will take my place. The Dominion cannot be defeated. Elias grinned, stepping up onto the ruined dais where the High Lord's throne once stood. Then I guess we'll have to keep saying no until you listen. With a final, shattering impact, the Dominion's flagship collapsed in on itself, consumed by fire and debris. The last transmission received from the war chamber was Elias Carter's laughter, defiant until the very end. The war chamber was in ruins. Smoke curled from shattered consoles, sparks rained from the broken ceiling fixtures, and the once pristine banners of the Dominion hung in tatters. The High Lord Zarathian stood rigid, his biomechanical armor flickering with failing energy. His once imposing throne was little more than a molten husk, destroyed by the first orbital bombardment that had rattled the Dominion flagship to its core. Elias Carter stood across from him, feet planted firmly, a stolen sidearm clutched in his bloodied hand. Behind him, the sounds of battle raged beyond the walls, human soldiers breaching corridors, Dominion forces falling back, the ship itself groaning as it absorbed the relentless punishment from the fleet outside. Zarathian's glowing eyes remained fixed on Elias, though something had changed. The superiority that once radiated from him had dulled, replaced by something he never thought he would feel toward a human. Doubt. This is not how it ends, Zarathian hissed, voice low but trembling with fury. The Dominion is eternal. Elias exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he leveled the weapon at the High Lord's chest. That's the funny thing about eternity, he said. It never lasts. Another explosion rocked the chamber, causing the floor beneath them to shift. Zarathian's hand flexed as if he wanted to strike, to tear Elias apart with his bare claws, but the weight of reality anchored him in place. His fleet was losing. His forces were crumbling. And he was running out of time. Through the comms in Elias' ear, Admiral Vasquez's voice crackled through. Carter, we've breached the command deck. Dominion forces are falling back. We estimate total control in under 15 minutes. Elias never took his eyes off Zarathian. Roger that, Admiral. Have the fleet hold fire until we secure the bridge. Understood. And Carter, try not to die before we get there. Elias smirked. No promises. Zarathian let out a low, guttural growl. You think this is victory? Killing me won't end this war. Elias arched a brow. Oh, I know that. He took a step closer. But it'll send one hell of a message. The High Lord bristled, but Elias didn't miss the way his stance faltered ever so slightly. Even now, the great ruler of the Dominion had to face the one truth he had refused to acknowledge since the start of this war. Humans didn't just survive. They won. Zarathian's lips curled in frustration. You are still mortal. The Dominion will. A new voice interrupted him. A Dominion officer, barely standing, bleeding from a gash across his forehead, stumbled into the chamber, his breathing ragged. My lord, the fleet, they're gone? Zarathian turned sharply. What? The officer swallowed hard. Our dreadnoughts, they're breaking formation. They're retreating? Elias whistled lowly. Looks like your empire's got a survival instinct after all. Zarathian's jaw clenched, his glowing eyes flickering. For the first time, his empire had abandoned him. He had commanded millions, ruled the stars with an iron fist, and now, in the moment of greatest need, they had left him to die. Elias holstered the stolen weapon, stepping closer, standing mere feet from the alien ruler. I'll give you a choice, he said. Surrender, call off your forces, and maybe we let you live. Zarathian's fists clenched. You think I would yield to a primitive? Before he could finish, Elias struck. A human punch lacked the raw power of the Dominion's might, but what it lacked in strength, it made up for in sheer audacity. The impact sent Zarathian stumbling backward, crashing onto what remained of his throne. Elias stood over him, shaking out his fist. I wasn't asking. The High Lord of the Dominion lay still for a long moment, his eyes burning with anger and humiliation. The great and powerful Zarathian, brought low by a Deathworlder. Elias pressed a boot against the fallen ruler's chest, leaning in close. Say it, he whispered. Zarathian's jaw trembled, his hands twitching, but the weight of defeat pressed harder than any physical blow. The words nearly choked him as they escaped his lips. I yield. The war was over. But Elias wasn't done. With a sharp motion, he grabbed the High Lord by the front of his armor, hauling him up just enough so they were face to face. You're going to call off every remaining Dominion force, Elias growled. Every last fleet, every outpost, every soldier still standing. You tell them it's over. Now. Zarathian's mouth opened, then closed, his gaze shifting toward the broken command consoles. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries, believing themselves untouchable, unbreakable. But now, they had lost. With a heavy breath, he activated his personal communicator. This is High Lord Zarathian. To all Dominion forces, stand down. Do not engage. The war is over? The words burned him as he spoke them, but the command went out. Across the fleet, Dominion ships hesitated, then stopped their fire. Human forces pushed forward, but no further shots were exchanged. It was done. Elias released him, letting the High Lord slump back onto the remains of his throne. Smart choice. He turned as the chamber doors burst open. Human soldiers flooded in, weapons raised, Admiral Vasquez at the helm. Damn, Carter, she said, surveying the wreckage. You really do have a way of making an entrance. Elias wiped the blood from his knuckles and grinned. What can I say? Deathworlders don't know how to quit. The war was over, but humanity's legacy had only just begun. The war was over. The words echoed across every communication channel, spreading like wildfire through the remnants of both fleets. Human and Dominion alike paused, their weapons still hot from battle, their hearts pounding with uncertainty. High Lord Zarathian, once the unshakable ruler of the Dominion, lay slumped against the broken remains of his throne, his biomechanical armor flickering with failing energy. He had yielded. The Dominion had surrendered. Yet Elias Carter knew better than to celebrate. He stood over Zarathian, breathing heavily, his knuckles still raw from the impact of his final strike. The room around them was a wreck, smoke and sparks filling the air. Human soldiers flooded the chamber, their weapons trained on the remaining Dominion officers, but none dared to move. There was no more fight left in them. Admiral Vasquez stepped forward, her boots crunching against the shattered remains of a Dominion control panel. It's over, Carter, she said, her voice steady but low. We won. Elias shook his head, his expression grim. Winning the fight isn't the same as winning the war. Vasquez exhaled, glancing at the wreckage around them. She understood. The Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries. Even with their leader defeated, their infrastructure stretched across countless systems. There would be resistance. Rebellions. A war's official end didn't mean the fight was over. Zarathian coughed, the sound a bitter rasp. He lifted his head, his glowing eyes dim but still burning with defiance. You think, this is the end? He said. You have no idea what you've done. Elias knelt beside him, gripping the front of his tattered armor. I know exactly what we've done. We've taken your empire and shattered it. We've shown the galaxy that humans don't surrender. His voice was firm, unwavering. But you? You're finished? Zarathian let out a weak laugh. The Dominion was never just me. You have no idea what forces you've set into motion. There are others, stronger than I, who will not accept this outcome. Elias narrowed his eyes. Let them come. The High Lord held his gaze for a long moment, then smirked. You Deathworlders, so stubborn. So naive. Elias let him go, standing up. He turned to Vasquez. Secure him. We'll need him alive, for now. Vasquez gave a sharp nod, signaling two soldiers forward. They hauled Zarathian to his feet, binding his arms and reinforced restraints. The once mighty ruler of the Dominion was now just another prisoner. Outside, the human fleet was already moving. Shuttles descended toward the Dominion capital, carrying ground teams to secure key locations. Battleships loomed overhead, their weapons locked onto any last holdouts. The Dominion had ruled through fear. Now, for the first time in centuries, they were the ones who feared. Elias walked to the shattered viewport, staring out at the carnage beyond. Fires burned on the Dominion's homeworld. Debris drifted through the black void of space, the remnants of the once impervious Dominion armada. And yet, despite it all, he felt no triumph. Vasquez joined him. "You were right," she admitted. "The fighting's not over." Elias clenched his fists. "It never really is." Days later, the occupation begins. The once proud Dominion capital was now a husk of its former self. Smoke still curled from ruined buildings, and the sky was darkened by the lingering dust of orbital bombardment. Human soldiers patrolled the streets, their armored boots echoing through the vacant corridors of power. The Dominion citizens had been forced to confront a new reality. Their empire was no longer supreme. Elias stood in what had once been the Grand Hall of Governance, now repurposed as a command center for the occupation forces. He studied a holographic display of the Dominion's remaining territories, dozens of star systems blinking red, indicating unrest. Admiral Vasquez entered, looking weary but resolute. "Reports are coming in," she said. "Some Dominion warlords are refusing to accept the surrender. They're rallying forces in the outer systems." "It's not over yet." Elias exhaled sharply. "Of course they are. The Dominion spanned half the galaxy. We didn't expect them all to just roll over." "That's not all," Vasquez continued. "There's intelligence suggesting that some of their elite forces, Black Ops units, fanatics, are planning strikes against our occupation zones. They won't fight us head-on, but they'll bleed us dry with insurgencies." Elias pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is why I don't celebrate victories." Vasquez smirked, crossing her arms. "You don't celebrate anything, Carter?" He looked up at her, offering a tired smile. "Not until it's actually over." A comms officer rushed in, urgency written across his face. "Captain Carter, Admiral Vasquez, we just intercepted a transmission from one of the Dominion's remaining strongholds. You'll want to hear this." The officer pressed a button and a deep, guttural voice filled the chamber. "To the so-called victors of Earth. You believe this war is won. You believe our empire has crumbled. You're wrong. We are the Dominion. We do not kneel. We do not break. We will have our vengeance." The transmission cut out, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Elias exchanged a look with Vasquez. "Sounds like someone didn't get the memo." She sighed. "What's the plan?" Elias turned back to the holographic map, eyes scanning the troubled regions. "We finish what we started. We root out the last of them, system by system. We put an end to the Dominion for good." Vasquez nodded. "And Zarathian? What do we do with him?" Elias thought for a moment, then turned toward the holding cells where the former High Lord was being kept. "Let's see how useful he wants to be." The legacy of war. As the days turned to weeks, the occupation of the Dominion's core worlds faced increasing resistance. Skirmishes erupted in far-off colonies, and assassination attempts on human officers became a grim reality. Despite their losses, remnants of the Dominion clung to the past, unwilling to let their empire truly die. Elias Carter had spent his life fighting, but even he knew that wars didn't end with a single battle. The war had been won, but the peace? That would be the real fight. Standing atop the ruined balcony of the Dominion's former palace, he looked down at the smoldering city below. Victory had come at a cost. And it wasn't over yet. Humans didn't surrender. And neither did the enemies they left behind.